In 1859, a search party on a frozen Arctic island opened a stone cairn and found a pre-printed Royal Navy form, the standard record every discovery ship carried to log its position. Scrawled in the margins was the final message from 105 doomed men. It recorded the death of their commander, the loss of their ships, and a desperate plan to walk south into the ice. It did not record what happened next. There were no survivors left to write it down. In May of 1845, 2 Royal Navy ships sailed from England to chart the final unmapped section of the Northwest Passage, the sea route through the Arctic ice that explorers had chased for 3 centuries. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror were reinforced bomb ships built for punishment, iron-plated at the bow, fitted with steam locomotive engines for auxiliary power, and stocked with over 1,000 books for the long polar dark. 129 officers and men sailed aboard them, led by the aging Sir John Franklin, already 59 years old and on his 4th Arctic voyage. The ships anchored for their first winter off a barren spit of gravel called Beechy Island, where the crews lived aboard through the polar dark. Between January and April of 1846, 3 young sailors sickened and died, most likely from tuberculosis and pneumonia in the crowded, freezing decks. Their crewmates carried them ashore, broke apart ground frozen solid to bury them, and raised wooden headboards over each grave with careful, formal Victorian lettering. Those 3 graves would remain the only trace of the expedition anyone found for nearly a decade. By September of 1846, the ships pushed south into the ice off the coast of King William Island, and the pack ice closed around their hulls and simply did not let go. A winter came, then a second winter, then most of a third. For 19 months the ships sat locked in place, groaning under the constant pressure of shifting ice, drifting only as fast as the pack itself drifted, going nowhere a chart could mark. In June of 1847, Sir John Franklin died aboard his icebound ship. The official record gives no cause. Command passed to his second, Francis Crozier, a hardened Irish polar veteran who now faced a problem his predecessor never solved. By the following spring, 24 officers and men were dead, nearly a fifth of the entire expedition, and the ships had not moved a meaningful distance in a year and a half of provisions steadily running out. On the 22nd of April, 1848, the 105 men who remained did the only thing left to do. They stepped off their dying ships and onto the sea ice, hauling heavy wooden lifeboats mounted on iron sledges, each boat weighing far more than any man could comfortably drag, and began to walk south. Their destination was a Hudson's Bay trading post hundreds of miles away across open tundra. Almost none of them wore clothing built for cold like this. Wool coats and leather boots, not fur. A year earlier, a sledging party under Lieutenant Graham Gore had left a routine note in a cairn at a place called Victory Point, logging the ship's position while the expedition was still mapping the coastline, still whole. Now, as they abandoned ship, Crozier and Fitzjames climbed back to that same cairn and added an update in the margins that would outlive every one of them. The ships deserted, the death toll, the plan to march for the Back River. It is the last written word from the expedition that anyone has ever found. The rest of their route is marked only by where their bodies fell. Over the following years, skeletons were found scattered along 100 miles of coastline, some in small groups where men had clearly stopped together and not gotten up again. One abandoned lifeboat, found decades later, still held silver cutlery engraved with officers' initials and a pair of slippers, comforts of home dragged uselessly across the ice by men who were already starving to death. The Inuit of the region saw what happened next, because it happened on their land. Hunting families encountered small groups of starving white men dragging boats along the coast in the years that followed, men who could not speak their language and were visibly dying. Their detailed testimony, gathered by the explorer John Ray in the early 1850s, was later confirmed by forensic evidence. Cut marks on recovered bones showed that the final survivors had resorted to cannibalism. When Ray brought this account home to Victorian Britain in 1854, the public refused to believe a word of it. Officers of the Royal Navy did not become cannibals, the newspapers insisted, and the celebrated author Charles Dickens personally wrote a public rebuttal dismissing the Inuit witnesses outright. Their testimony was disbelieved for well over a century, even as later forensic evidence proved almost every detail of it correct. The ships themselves stayed hidden for another century and a half. In September of 2014, guided in significant part by Inuit oral history passed down across generations, a Parks Canada search team finally found the wreck of HMS Erebus, resting upright in barely 11 meters of water, remarkably whole after 166 years on the seabed. 2 years later, in 2016, HMS Terror was found in a bay the local Inuit had long called by a name that referenced a wreck no outsider had ever confirmed. Divers found cabin windows still intact and plates still stacked neatly on built-in shelves, the ship perfectly preserved in the freezing water, looking as though her crew had just stepped onto the ice. 129 men sailed for the Northwest Passage in 1845. Not one of them is known to have survived, and for 170 years the Arctic ice kept most of their story to itself. What finally broke it open was never a Royal Navy log or an admiral's report. It was the account the Inuit gave from the very beginning, the one an empire decided for a century it did not want to hear.